Welcome back. Let's talk about balancing our personal freedoms with public health issues and balancing physical health with fiscal health. Got a great group to talk about that this morning. Joined by, as we will go clockwise here from the upper left, you see Stephen Henderson from Detroit Today on WDET. Moving to the right from there, Michael Stellini, who's been with us before, medical ethicist from Wayne State University. Below him is Nolan Finley, editorial page editor of the Detroit News, and Candace Miller, Public Works Director for Macomb County, and of course before that, a member of the U.S. Congress. And Candace, let me start with you. I'm curious as to how you think right now we should be weighing these many sort of yearnings that we have to want to stay healthy, to worry about public health, but at the same time respect, as we always have in America, people's right to do as they want and do as they choose.
Well, it certainly is the most challenging experiment or experience, I should say, that any of us have ever been through. And, you know, here in Southeast Michigan, we're sort of in the vortex of it. I mean, besides New York and New Jersey, it's Michigan that have all of these deaths, the horrific numbers that have come out of the city. And, you know, I'm in Macomb County, and it's horrifying what is happening. But it is, and I think it's difficult for us. I mean, people, particularly Americans, I mean, we're an independent lot here. We're not used to being stuck at home and we can't do this and we can't do that. Yeah. Everything's closed. So it really is a difficult thing, but I do think hats off, because really, as we see the numbers plateau, as we see them on the decline now, it is quite incredible what has happened with personal behavior and how most people have taken all these decrees very seriously, whether they're coming from Washington or here in Michigan, and thinking about we have to be so careful when we're living so that we don't contract this terrible, terrible virus.
It's really been something to watch as people have, for the most part, followed along. Michael Stellini, though, I'm curious, it would be one thing to say to people, look, I want to go out, and if I get the disease, then I get the disease. I'm willing to take that risk. The trouble is, it's not so much you getting it as you may be unwittingly passing it on to other people. That kind of changes this calculus a little, doesn't it?
Exactly. You know, folks who have looked at this kind of thing in the past have shown, as Candace said, that, you know, most Americans are willing to give up some liberty for the good of everyone. And the idea that we could harm somebody else by our behavior, not just ourselves, is really the case. You know, and we have a moral obligation that we don't harm others, and that's really what justifies the, you know, restricting liberties. Most people get that. And historically they have throughout our history during different times, Civil War, you know, forward, et cetera. We've had to do that. So yes, absolutely. When we could harm other people by our behavior, it's not just taking risk for ourselves. Yeah. And we have a obligation not to do that.
Stephen, I think it was kind of predictable that we would reach a panic room kind of stage in this, where people were just, you know, that willing to go along for a long point, but certainly we could expect a breaking point was coming. And I think for a lot of people, certainly Republican leadership in the legislature, those who've been marching on Lansing, we're at it. We're there.
Yeah, I mean, people are restless, and I think people are anxious, not just about public health, but also their economic state. I mean, you've got a lot of people, individuals who are suffering on two fronts, right? Their public health is at risk, but their financial well-being is also at risk. I think we are not at the breaking point so much as a people. Every poll that I see says that people are more concerned that a relaxation of the restrictions will cause another outbreak than they are about getting back to life as quote unquote normal. It doesn't mean people don't care about economics, but it means that their priorities are on public health, which is where we need the government's priorities to be. I'm reminded in the conversation that's going on in Lansing now of the recent experience we had with Flint, where money and economic concerns were put ahead of public health. And we've seen what the consequences of that look like. I think we have different leadership now that's making different decisions. And I think the people of Michigan chose that, knowing that that these would be the kinds of priorities this governor would choose.
Well, Nolan, your editorial page is taking great issue right now, though, with the way the governor is making her decisions. I'll ask you the same question I asked Lee Chatfield either. Is it more the decisions that she's making or the way that she's arriving at them?
I think the issue here is not enough common sense in the decisions. I mean, there's some things, I think as a whole, I agree with Steve, the people know that this is necessary and agree that there are some sorts of restrictions, some level of restrictions that have to be put in place, but there seems to be a stubbornness at work here, an unwilling to weigh the different situations and come and instead of a one size solution, add some flexibility. I'm thinking about the rural hospitals who are about to go under, many of them, and yet they've had no COVID patients, but they can't do any other procedures. And so you've got a number of rural hospitals who face bankruptcy. What's that going to do to the long-term health of our state? So I think it's the sort of broad brush she's used here and her refusal to in any way be flexible. I don't think people are really sitting around for the most part saying, I can do whatever I want, I got rights. I think there's a lot of despair out there, a lot of desperation as people are seeing their small businesses go down, their jobs lost, and starting to really worry now about their long-term future, how they're going to support their families, what they're going to do for work when this is over.
Candace, we know we've had enough cases in Macomb County, but in your old congressional district, you get up to Huron County, Sanilac County, not as much. Should we be approaching this in a regional way, or are we too connected to do that?
Well, first of all, let me say I've been very hesitant to second guess either the president or our governor. I mean, I'm not sitting in their shoes. None of us are, right? These are incredibly difficult choices that they are trying to make. And they're trying to meld, I think, you know, the devastation from a health standpoint, as well as the economic devastation that's out there. But if I were to give any advice to our governor, I would say that I think a little bit more of a regional approach could be helpful. Because as you say, I mean, you can go up to Huron County and I don't know how many cases are up there, but a handful. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there are so many areas in the Upper Peninsula, et cetera. And as Nolan has just said, really, I think the thing that is of huge concern right now is the hospitals, the rural hospitals. And I think we all share that concern. I actually sit on the board of McLaren Macomb. You know, we're a big hospital and a big chain. And certainly here in Macomb, we have a big presence. But I'll tell you, we're hemorrhaging cash, just like all the hospitals are, because no one's wanting to come into the emergency room.
Yeah.
Safe now to come in. But in some of these rural counties, if they lose their hospital, that is really a huge concern. I think we really need to focus on that. Healthcare, yes, we're really focused on healthcare. Let's make sure that we have it long-term for everybody in Michigan.
Michael, we talked about this on the program last week. I think many Americans have been dumbfounded to see how reliant many of our hospitals and healthcare systems are on what we are being termed elective procedures.
Right. So it is true, actually, that a lot of hospitals do make a fair amount of money out of doing elective things like joint replacements, for example, and those have really been put on hold. The problem is the public's perception about, you know, what's elective has sort of spilled over into people going to the emergency department, you know, when they should, because of things like heart problems, lung problems that aren't, emphysema and things like that. So we are seeing a little bit of lifting of the restrictions, and I know in Detroit and probably everywhere now they're starting to do more elective things with precautions. That's starting. And you've seen public service announcements, and we're doing it with our own patients. You know, come into the hospital if you're sick. We're safe. We know what we're doing, and we'll protect you. And you need to get your other things taken care of. It's disturbing that we're seeing, you know, paramedics showing up and people already dead in their homes soon enough. So if we could spread that message that yes, you should take care of yourself. You should come in if you need to. that'd really be important.
It's going to be hard to figure out, calculate what that part of this cost has been. Stephen, back to the governor for just a minute. There's an art, if you're an elected leader, to making other people do what you want them to and convincing them that it was their idea. And she's decided almost defiantly and very pointedly to kind of go it alone here, rather than trying to bring the legislative leadership along with her. Is that the right approach, or is she missing an opportunity here because those Republican leaders represent a lot of people too?
They do, and I guess I would put it another way. I mean, the governor has been absolutely inclusive of everybody in the discussions about how this is supposed to go. She's got public health officials, she's got business leaders, and the leadership of the legislature has been invited to all of those discussions. What they are upset about is not that they haven't been in the discussion. What they're upset about is that the discussion doesn't go their way and that they've left and that they can't make her do something different. I think some of the messaging around this has been more divisive perhaps than it needed to be. I think the administration has done some things that probably exacerbated the tensions between the executive and the legislative branch here. But I don't think the legislative branch has been shut out. I think that is a false narrative. They have chosen not to participate in a process that they don't control. And that's a very different dynamic.
Now, I can see Nolan shaking his head through a number of the things you just said. Nolan, I only got about 30 seconds left. Go ahead, though.
Because that's just not true. I mean, she went weeks without talking to Mike Shirkey. She's from the beginning. This governor has preferred to work around the legislature rather than do the hard work of trying to build consensus. The Constitution doesn't go away just because of there's a crisis, just because there's an emergency. You need that oversight, and you need the representative branch to have its voice. Imagine if Donald Trump had said, well, I'm setting aside Congress. I'm not going to run anything I do by Congress. I'm going to make the law and enforce law and sign the law, and the legislative branch can go away.
I'm afraid I got to get to a break. I knew you two would get back to your normal sparring selves. Thanks, gang, so much for being here. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you again soon, and we'll wrap things up for Flashpoint right after this.